Hello and welcome to CodeSlicing. In this series, we're going to be looking at custom modifiers. And I suppose it makes sense to determine, what I actually mean by that, because it's not exactly clear. So let's say that a custom modifier is an encapsulation of visual and/or behavioral traits. And let's keep it as simple as that. And there are many ways of achieving this, but it usually boils down to these two, which is that you either implement view modifier, and that's fine, or you can just have an extension with your modifiers in there, your encapsulation and reusable code in there. So, those are the two main approaches, but there are certain circumstances where one is more appropriate than another. And in fact, sometimes you have to use a view modifier implementation. Now, in episodes 1 and 2, we're going to be looking at stateless modifiers, and that means we're not going to be using property wrappers. Now, they will have properties, but they're not going to have what you might call state as far as SwiftUI is concerned. In episode 3 and 4, we're going to be looking at stateful modifiers and why you might want to use those, and why you're then forced to use view modifiers. And then as we go on to episode 5, we're going to be looking at animatable modifiers, which is where things really get fun, and why you might have to use those, what they are, how we can rein them into something a little bit less confusing. And we're going to start with just writing an extension that gives you a very handy way of keeping these things together that give you some kind of style that you're interested in that can be reused across your project. So nothing too taxing to start off with. Let's get started. Right, so what we're going to do is take that circle, that beautifully styled circle, and create a custom modifier out of it. Now, this is a fairly good example for this because we often find ourselves with shapes wanting to stroke and fill them. But that requires us to perform the shenanigans that I've performed on line 12, is that we fill it and then we overlay it with another one of itself. So we're repeating ourselves, aren't we? Well, we don't like to do that. We're computer scientists. And we can take advantage of the fact that if we put an extension on shape, then we have access to that shape as well as being able to fill it initially, because fill is an extension on shape. So we're not going to put an extension on view for this one, although we will in a second. We're going to put an extension on shape, which looks something like this. I'll make this private. Extension on shape. Stroke with fill. Okay. Now we've got to be a little bit careful here because the shape style protocol has an associated type, which means we can't just shove it into the parameters, but we can put a type constraint on the function. So I'm going to do that for the stroke style and for the fill style, like this. So I'm going to say the stroke style is a shape style and the fill style is a shape style. And then I can just say that the stroke contents SS, we'll put a line width with a default value. So it's optional of 2. We'll say the fill is of type FS. And then we just grab what we've got here. Lovely. Put that there. Take that out because we're calling it directly on ourselves. But because I've called the parameter the same name, I need to say self. Okay, there we are. Now it knows we're talking about the extension on shape. And now, because we are in a shape and we are that shape, instead of circle, I can just say self here. Now we are passing in the stroke contents, so I can pass that in as well. And we're passing in the line width. All right. So if I want to use that, I can just, instead of this, I just say stroke with fill. I pass in the black color and the fill is the gradient. And there we are. That should get us to where we were before. And it's a lot cleaner. All right. That's what custom modifiers give you. Now let's do the shadow and frame, which is more of a view-based styling. So we'll say private extension on view. We'll call it default size and shadow sum view. We'll just say that the shadow is 5 and the frame is 100. And then we just say that that is default size and shadow. We can resume and it should show us exactly the same thing. Now, one thing to bear in mind here is that you are not restricted in any way by what you can do inside one of these extensions. All right, you don't have to return something related even to the thing you are modifying. There really are no limits. I'm going to prove that to you now. Let's just say I want a grid of these things. So I can say the following. And I'm going to call it grid, which has a number of columns and a number of rows, the spacing, which will default to 10. And that also returns some view. And we'll say vstack with the spacing of that. We'll loop to the number of rows. And then we'll say the hstack with the spacing that we've just got for each to the number of columns. And then it's just self. So we're wrapping ourselves in a grid however many times we specify. So now I can just take what we've got up here and just say grid 4x4. All right, resume. We've got a 4x4 grid. And if I can put that one underneath there, then they're smaller within that default frame that we've given it. But as you can see, we are not restricted by what we do inside one of these things, as long as it returns a view. You can return something that is completely unrelated. Okay, you could say, for example, you could say function return a rectangle if, give it a condition, which is a Boolean, and also return some view. And then you say, okay, if condition, then return a rectangle, else return self. All right, that's not going to be very happy because we are not returning the same type here. So we actually have to annotate that with a view builder, and then you'll be absolutely fine. And now instead of grid, we'll say return a rectangle if true. What's going to happen? We'll resume and we get a rectangle. I'll change it to false. Okay, and we get our original shape. So as you can see, I hope that has proven to you that you don't need to do anything relating to the thing that you're modifying, and you are completely uninhibited in what you can do in there. So there you go, nothing too complicated, but it does give you a lot of power as far as reusability, maintainability, general awesomeness is concerned. You know, it really does open up a world of possibilities once you start looking at these custom modifiers. Are they custom modifiers? I don't know, I'm calling them that. I think they are. Anyway, in the next episode, we're going to be looking at stateless modifiers that, well, might lead you down the road of implementing view modifier. You don't have to. But you might be convinced otherwise. So join me for that. It's going to be brilliant. If you like this content, then consider subscribing for more and smash that like button. If you have any comments or suggestions, please leave them below. But in the meantime, thanks for joining me. See you next time.